to us, to our friendship, to our agency, to another year.
There was a certain point in time where we sort of became the fair-haired boy in terms of we were their hit.
Hi, I'm Madeline Hayes, and this is David Addison.
Right. And we'd just like to take a minute or two before the show starts to welcome you back to another season of Moonlighting.
I wasn't much interested in doing 22 of anything. If I couldn't do them well, I was much more interested in doing what I did well. I had figured out sort of the dirty secret of television at that moment, which was enormous profits were being made. So some of that could certainly be plowed back into the making of the show.
This was basically a network show. So we did things both from from a financial standpoint that most episodic shows couldn't do.
We'd have these execs just hawking the hell out of Glenn. All they're worried about, the execs are worried about the numbers, the money.
I remember giving this lecture to the executives at ABC, because they were very upset we were spending all this, until the show became an enormous hit, which it did fairly quickly, but we were spending all this money, and I said, but here's the thing, I said, you'll spend all this money on our show, but you can run it 3 and 4 times and it'll still get a 30 share, and it did. I said, because there's so many jokes buried in it, you really need to watch it 2 or 3 times. It's like a Marx Brothers movie in the sense of the density of the jokes. And I really thought this made sense as an argument. I mean, I would say it to anybody who would listen. Why should all television shows cost the same amount of money? Why should they? Because back then that was the thing. If it was an hour, we pay you this much money to make the show. And I thought that was asinine. Our show costs more, and what's the problem?
The thing that they really had the most problem with was we weren't able to meet all our air dates. And I think there was more pressure about that than there was about the financial. I think if they had to choose between spend more money and get it on the air, they would have spent more money.
The show aired on Tuesday night. And on 1 or 2 occasions, I remember coming in at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday and shooting a scene, or even 2 small scenes, for that episode that aired that night.
The story was that one week, I believe, we made the satellite feed by a half hour.
A lot of times, because we were so late, they would literally beam the show wet to the East Coast, and we would get away with a lot of stuff that at the time was pretty risque for TV.
Get your hand off my behind.
Is that your behind? Is that my hand? You know, that's what I like about this place. You learn something new every day.
Would you get serious?
Maddie, I just have my hand on your behind. If I get any more serious, they're going to move us to cable.
Sometimes there'd be delays in scripts and stuff like that. But as long as you kept going, ABC it never seemed to really bug us about, as long as we got the show done, it was okay, because the show was breaking new ground at the time. It was really, really breaking new ground.
I've been in downtown Los Angeles in a location where the script supervisor was on the telephone with Glenn in longhand writing down the scene, writing down the dialogue, and then would take it, and I think we had a copy machine at least on the truck, copy some of those pages and hand them out to the crew and hand them out to the cast, and they'd learn the scene and we'd go shoot it.
We were always behind schedule because we were shooting it really like a film. And so the way we would try to catch up time was the car shots.
Mom, will you read me a story before I go to bed?
I mean, if you look at the driving stuff, if you really want to look at them closely and have fun with them, watch how bad a job they both do of pretending to drive. Because they're so caught up in the scene, and it was a nightmare in the editing room because they're not driving. And when you got the performances that we did, the last thing you want to do is give them a note of, let's go back and do this scene again, but drive better. I mean, it's just a dumb note.
A lot of times we did have the script pasted across the dashboard so you couldn't see it. She never saw us reading it, though. Sad to think that an innocent person had to die just because she fell for the wrong guy.
Wait a second. There's a page missing out of my copy of the script.
Classic Moonlighting. Just make fun of ourselves before somebody else can.
As a little girl, you were more of a door slammer, like your father. Still am. And the slamming doors was something that we had to rebuild the doors every season because I would slam them so hard.
Of course I'll step into your office.
The thing that I loved most, I think, about working on Moonlighting is that if we wrote a joke and let's say 20 million people were watching the show, and it's like you'd think, okay, 12 million people will get this joke, but 8 million won't. Glenn would say, it's great, throw it out, let's do it, let's put it in. When I worked on other shows, it's like, not everyone's going to get it, so we can't use it. And I think that's why it was so much fun. And, we just wrote everything we could think of.
That was all Glenn's doing. I mean, Glenn created the atmosphere, Glenn created the mold, and he said something that no one ever said in a sitcom to us, which is, what's the truth of the scene? Emotionally, what's it about? And things like, people don't care how you figured out who was the murderer. They care about what's going on between David and Maddie. That was the truth of the scene. That was a revelation to us, and that was something we took to heart then and ever since.
Anybody could have an idea. There was no real ego. Nobody had an ego. It's this is my show, or that was another great thing about Jay and Glenn.
Working in the writing room at the beginning, it was a little scary because it was a completely new thing, but it was mostly a really thrilling thing because we sort of knew right away that we could try almost anything. We could try things that hadn't been tried before. That template was there.
When we did the black and white show, Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice, ABC originally pleaded with us not to film it in black and white. Film it in color, we'll take the color out. And I had enough experience at this point with the network to realize that was a fool's mission. So we literally went out and got the old cameras and the old film stock, and then discovered there was no lab in Hollywood that would develop it for us. Nobody wanted to take the liability. Finally, we were able to convince MGM Labs to develop this film in black and white. We put it together, and we knew we really had something special, but ABC was still terribly concerned that we were showing this black and white television show, in 1986.
Again, Glenn had so much balls to stand up to the network so many times to protect the show and to do things like that, because yes, it would have been so easy to do it in color and then say, well, we'll take the black and white out later, but it doesn't look the same.
And they felt that, like The Wizard of Oz, which was a movie that was shown in this country every year, and every year they went to great lengths to explain to people the first part is in black and white, the second part is in color, there's nothing wrong with your television set. ABC felt it was important for us to offer that kind of assurance to the audience. So we thought, well, who should do this? I don't know, again, it just cracked me up. Orson Welles, here's the man who probably made the most beautiful black and white film, ever. So I wrote this thing, which he ultimately said, about, very special monochromatic, blah, 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 moonlighting, so get grandma and the kids and lock them in the basement. And it was a pretty funny thing, and I called him up and said, would you be interested in doing this thing? And to my amazement, he said, well, I'll send it over. So I sent it over, and he called back and said, I think it's funny.
In this age of living color and stereophonic sound, the television show Moonlighting is daring to be different.
I met him October 4th, I remember, because it was my mother's birthday. And he passed away October 11th, just exactly 1 week later. And we took pictures, and I had my script with me, and I got his autograph. So right where it said, written by and our names, he signed it. And, that was just such a thrill.
I remember standing on the stage and saying, I'm actually here, and that's Orson Welles. And then I sort of felt something, and I looked around, and the stage had filled with people. Everybody very reverently, very silently had just sort of wandered in, standing in the shadows, watching Orson Welles. And I'll never forget that.
There was something about it. I thought it was very surreal, but most of my experience on Moonlighting was pretty surreal.